You, curious soul of the night, what's the worst experience you could have at an Airbnb? Here are 3 horror stories no guest should ever face. Footsteps beneath the floor, a too helpful host, and a cabin door that knocks back. An intimate horror narration about vacations turned into nightmares. Sit close, listen closer, and keep the lights on. About 4 years ago, I rented an Airbnb for the holidays. I was visiting my family for Christmas week and wanted a quiet place just a few miles away from their house. The listing looked perfect, a small, cozy home in a quiet neighborhood. When I arrived on December 20th, everything seemed normal. The place was neat, comfortable, and exactly as advertised. Since I'd driven all day, I didn't feel like going out that night. I unpacked, made some food, and spent the evening relaxing. Around 10, I climbed into bed and fell asleep easily. At some point in the night, though, I woke to a faint noise coming from downstairs. Still half asleep, I lay there listening. Soft, dull thumps echoing through the quiet house. They sounded like someone lightly hitting the wall. I wasn't alarmed, just confused. It was an unfamiliar house, so I figured it was the pipes or the heater clicking. After a minute or two, the noise stopped, and I drifted back to sleep. By morning, I'd completely forgotten about it. The day went on as planned. I texted my family to let them know I'd made it, and we set up dinner plans for later. I stayed at the house all morning, enjoying the downtime, watching TV, and getting some work done. Everything felt perfectly normal again. By evening, I grabbed my bag and keys and went to head out. But when I opened the front door, my stomach dropped. A man was standing on the porch. He was just there, silent, staring at me. I froze, caught completely off guard. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't say anything. No greeting, no knock, nothing. After a long moment, he gave a small nod, then turned and walked down the steps toward the street. I watched him until he disappeared down the sidewalk. The encounter unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Why had he been standing there so quietly? How long had he been outside before I opened the door? Trying not to dwell on it, I locked up the house and left for dinner. When I told my family about it later, they agreed it was creepy, but probably harmless. Maybe a lost neighbor, or someone who had the wrong address. We moved on to lighter topics, and the evening went by quickly. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that man's blank face as he walked away. It was around 9 when I headed back. The drive was short, maybe 15 minutes, and I remember scanning the neighborhood as I pulled in. Everything looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place. Inside, I dropped my keys and bag on the kitchen counter and started winding down. That's when it happened again. A thump. This time, louder, deep, deliberate, coming from the same side of the house I'd heard it from the night before. I froze and listened. Then, another thump. My pulse started racing. I followed the sound to the hallway, my hand trembling as I reached for the light switch. The noise came again, right beside me, from behind a closed door, the garage. I jumped back as the door rattled, followed by the faint sound of breathing. Someone was on the other side, close enough that I could hear each exhale. That's when pure panic took over. I grabbed my keys and ran out the front door to my car. From the driveway, I called 911 and waited. Every passing second felt like an hour. When the police finally arrived, I watched them enter the house, flashlights cutting through the darkness. It only took them a few minutes to find what I hadn't dared to check myself. The noise had been coming from the garage. The person had been trying to break in. The door showed clear marks where someone had been forcing it open. Even worse, there was a side door leading from the outside into the garage. A door I never used. And apparently, the last guest had left unlocked. The realization made me sick. I had been sleeping in that house, unaware that someone was right below me, probably watching and waiting for the right moment to get inside. Whether it was the same man I saw on the porch, I'll never know. But the thought that he could have been standing there that night, watching me through the windows, still makes my skin crawl. After that, I packed my things and checked into a hotel for the rest of the trip. My family insisted I made the right call. Still, sometimes, especially around the holidays, I find myself thinking back to that Airbnb, thinking about the quiet thumps that woke me up, the man who never knocked, and the locked door that almost wasn't. Last New Year's Eve, my two best friends and I decided to do something simple but memorable. None of us were into huge parties or crowded celebrations. We just wanted a quiet night to ourselves. Since all of us were stuck living in cramped dorm rooms at the time, the idea of renting a whole house for one night sounded perfect. Having space, privacy, and freedom for once felt like a great way to end the year. My friend Jason found a cheap Airbnb on the outskirts of town, a small wooden cabin that looked straight out of a winter postcard. I drove there with my other friend, Christian, and we met Jason around noon on New Year's Eve. The place sat at the edge of a wooded road, surrounded by a few other cabins spread far apart, giving the whole area a quiet and isolated atmosphere. You could hear the wind rustling through the trees more than any sound of civilization. The inside was about what we expected, cozy, a bit old, and smelling faintly of pine and dust. The floors creaked. The furniture looked like it hadn't been updated in years, but it had warmth to it. None of us were picky. It was just for one night. We unpacked our bags and spent the afternoon lounging in the living room, talking, scrolling through our phones, and making dumb jokes. Around 6 p.m., Christian left to grab snacks and drinks from a nearby store, while Jason and I stayed behind to chill. That's when the first weird thing happened. A loud, deliberate knock hit the front door. Jason and I froze. We weren't expecting anyone, and this cabin was far from any main road. It was strange for someone to even be out here, especially as the sun was already setting. I got up and looked through the people. A man stood on the porch, mid-40s, wearing a worn-out jacket, staring right at the door. The cabin had one of those small metal latches on the inside, so I flipped it over and cracked the door open just an inch. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man's face was tight and angry. Without any greeting, he said in a flat, hostile tone, "You guys need to keep it down tonight. Don't disturb the whole neighborhood." His tone was sharp and aggressive, almost like he was warning us. But we hadn't been making any noise. No music, no yelling, nothing. And given how far apart the cabins were, there was no way he could have heard us, even if we had been. His words didn't make sense. Trying not to escalate things, I just said, "All right, we'll be quiet," and shut the door. Not even a second later, he banged on it again, harder this time. The sound made both of us jump. Jason looked at me with wide eyes, silently asking if we should call someone. I decided to ignore it, waiting for him to leave. After a few long seconds, he finally walked away. When Christian came back with snacks, we told him what happened. He thought we were joking at first, but when he saw how tense we were, he realized it was real. We laughed it off eventually, trying not to let it ruin the night. The next few hours went by peacefully. We watched a movie, played some games on Jason's Switch, and counted down to midnight. But just as we were about to celebrate, a strange noise came from outside, like something heavy hitting the ground. A few seconds later, the sharp sound of glass shattering pierced the quiet. We all ran to the window. The man from earlier was standing by Christian's car. The windshield was completely smashed, glittering with shards of glass under the porch light. He was holding a metal baseball bat and pacing around, muttering to himself, his movements erratic and unhinged. Christian, furious, rushed toward the door before we could stop him. Jason and I shouted for him to wait, but he swung the door open and stormed outside to confront the man. I barely made it halfway to the doorway when a deafening gunshot exploded through the air. The sound froze me in place. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. I thought Christian had been shot. But then, out of nowhere, he sprinted back inside, slammed the door, and locked it behind him. His hands were shaking, his face pale. "He's got a gun!" he yelled. More gunshots followed, ripping into the side of the cabin. We ducked behind the couch as the man started smashing the bat against the door, each hit echoing through the small room. Then, just as suddenly as it all started, everything went quiet. We stayed there, holding our breath, listening. Eventually, we heard footsteps running off into the distance. The police arrived nearly 30 minutes later. By that time, the man was gone. The investigation revealed that he wasn't one of the neighbors. In fact, nobody around there even recognized him. He didn't live nearby, and no one knew where he came from or why he'd targeted us. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere, completely detached from reality, and decided to attack. We were lucky to walk away unharmed that night. But even now, whenever New Year's comes around, I can't help but think about that man, standing under the porch light, eyes full of rage, gripping a bat in one hand and a gun in the other. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there somewhere, waiting for his next door to knock on. A few weeks ago, I went on a short trip and rented an Airbnb townhouse in a small, quiet town near a few hiking trails I'd been wanting to explore. I'd never been there before. All I knew was that it was a small place, supposedly peaceful, and conveniently located. The drive took 9 hours, so by the time I arrived, the sun had already dipped below the hills. The townhouse was on a street lined with others just like it. Narrow 2-bedroom homes stacked side by side. I parked on the curb, grabbed my luggage, and walked up to the door. From the outside, it looked decent. A little worn, but nothing out of the ordinary. I checked my email for the door code, but couldn't find one. So I texted the host to let him know I'd arrived. A minute later, I heard a door open next door. A man rounded the corner with a friendly smile and waved. "Hey, you must be Emma. I'm the host," he said. He unlocked the door for me, showed me where everything was, and mentioned casually that he lived right next door if I needed anything. That caught me off guard. I hadn't realized the owner actually lived beside the property. Still, he didn't linger, and I was tired, so I brushed it off. I unpacked, checked out the small kitchen and living room, then went to bed early. The next morning, I made breakfast and headed out for my first hike. The trails were beautiful, quiet forest paths that wound through rocky hills and creeks. By the time I got back around 7 p.m., I was exhausted and ready to relax. But when I stepped inside, something immediately felt wrong. It wasn't anything obvious, Just small details. My backpack wasn't exactly where I'd left it. A jacket that had been on the chair was now draped over the couch. Nothing was missing, but the room felt disturbed, like someone had been there. I told myself I was overthinking it. I'd been hiking all day. Maybe I'd just forgotten where I put things. Still uneasy, I checked around. Every window, every door. But everything seemed locked and fine. Eventually, I convinced myself to let it go. I heated up a frozen meal, ate on the couch, and scrolled through YouTube until I felt sleepy. Around 11, I turned off the lights and went to bed. The house was a single story, and the bedroom was at the very end of the hallway, the farthest point from the front door. I wasn't used to sleeping on the ground floor, and it made me feel strangely exposed. Every tiny creak in the walls put me on edge. I kept dozing off and waking up again, restless. Then, maybe an hour later, I heard it. A door opening somewhere across the house. Not a slam, not the sound of wind. A slow, careful creak, like someone trying to open it without being heard. I sat up immediately, heart pounding. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I just listened. Nothing. The silence felt heavy. I got out of bed, crept to the bedroom door, and cracked it open just enough to peek into the hallway. At the far end, the faint glow from the porch light spilled into the entryway. But something was wrong. The front door was partially open. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. But instead, I quietly closed my bedroom door and locked it. Then, I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in the house. Halfway through explaining, I froze. There was a sound, soft movement, right outside my door. Then, a shadow fell across the gap at the bottom of it. Someone was standing there, listening. I stopped talking and held my breath. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards shifting as they stood just inches away. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then, after a few seconds, the shadow moved. Footsteps, slow, retreating, down the hall. I whispered to the dispatcher again, telling them to hurry. I didn't move until I saw red and blue lights flashing through the window. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. Whoever had been inside was gone, but the evidence was there. Dirty shoe prints across the hallway floor, the front door wide open, and small scuff marks near the bedroom, like someone had been leaning or bracing against it. I told them I suspected the host next door. He was the only person who knew I was staying there. But they couldn't find any proof. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints other than mine. It was possible he still had a spare key. That night, I packed up and left for a hotel. I didn't care about the refund or the long drive back the next day. It's been weeks, and I still replay it in my head. The quiet creak, the shadow under the door, the feeling of someone just standing there, inches away, waiting. Nothing was stolen, nothing damaged, but I know whoever was in that house wasn't there to rob me. They were there for me. Still here? Thanks for listening. Tap the link and watch 3 more nightmares.